This morning on BRN, for older unmarried couples in America, caregiving roles and obligations can be murky. Joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Deborah Carr, the director of Boston University's Center for Innovation in Social Science. Dr. Carr, so great to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And you and your team have done a tremendous amount of research around couples and specifically unmarried couples. And I guess I'll start with the basic question. Is the number of unmarried couples growing or contracting?
It's actually growing, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that we have a phenomenon called gray divorce, which means rising numbers of people in their 40s, 50s, and even 60s are divorcing. And many of them want a partner, but they don't want to necessarily marry and take on all the legal baggage that goes with that. So they are cohabiting in larger numbers. And also, times have changed, norms have changed. So it's no longer the case that those couples are viewed as living in sin, but they are supported and cherished just as any loving older couple might be.
Yeah, and I chuckle a little bit because it used to be, and I think that the norms, societal norms have changed. I mean, just, I'm not a sociologist. I'm just saying, I think anecdotally that people are a lot more accepting, realizing that marriages begin and relationships ebb and contract, right? That it's just a part of human life.
Absolutely. People grow and change. Some people decide to stay together for the sake of the children. And another thing that we found in the research is that people know they're going to live a long time, right? Life
Mm.
expectancy is getting longer and longer. And there are people who wake up at 50 or 60 and say, do I want to grow old with this person next to me? And in some cases, that answer is no. And so they do divorce and find new partners. And in some cases, it's remarriage that's actually judged a little bit more harshly than cohabiting because adult children are very protective of what they see as their inheritance. There's a lot of legal rigmarole with remarriage. There are issues with pension benefits, for instance, from
Yeah.
one's former spouse. So the world is actually set up to facilitate cohabitation in a way that it makes marriage actually pretty difficult for older couples.
Yeah, I'm thinking about in popular culture, Anna Nicole Smith. I think she married during her life a very wealthy man who was I got to say he was like 60 or 70 years older than she was. That at least, and it created so much tumult. But what are some things that we need to be aware of? So if we're thinking about, let's talk about it from the partner perspective first. If I'm going to enter into a relationship, I like somebody a lot. We agree that we're going to kind of cohabitate. That person likes me. I'm married, by the way, so I'm just saying hypothetically. Hypothetically, what are some things that we need to be thinking about before entering into that type of relationship?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think one issue is whether actually to live together at all.
Mm,
There are rising numbers of older adults who want to go steady, but they don't actually want to live together. And there's a relationship called living apart together, which is you go steady, you are each other's date to all major holidays. You are really a very embedded and wed together couple, but both people maintain their own homes. And that's something that also is kind of growing in popularity because older adults are settled in their home. They love their homes, they love their neighborhoods in some cases, and they don't want to particularly up and go. So I think that first decision is if you're a couple, do you want to live together or apart? Right. And as we all saw with the Golden Bachelor, who married and divorced very quickly, they jumped
yeah.
into what they thought was marriage and cohabitation too quickly without actually checking in with their grown children who lived hundreds of miles away. So I think that's kind of one of the first orders of business, asking oneself, how much sacrifice is there to actually live together and sell one's home and relocate as opposed to just maintaining his and her homes or his and his homes, depending on the couple, and
Sure.
then really just enjoying each other's company. So I think that's one of the first steps. But then deciding whether to cohabit or marry is a very big decision. And I think it's a decision that really does require talking honestly with all members of the family, including children, including former spouses, because there are decisions to be made about rewriting someone's will, for instance, or changing who it is that is your healthcare advocate at the end of life. There are a lot of very complex decisions that are relational, and really having the entire family talk openly and honestly can help shed light on maybe some of the obstacles to marriage or cohabitation that couples need to think about before they become an official item.
Yeah, and you talked about the what we need to be thinking about as individuals. You mentioned the children. How do you bring them into the conversation? Because as you mentioned earlier in in our conversation, there's a sense of protection. You want to protect mom, dad, relative from any harm, potentially financial harm, etc. How do you gauge that with that conversation with especially with older adult children? Someone like myself, I'm 52. So how would you what kind of conversation do you have to have around that?
Yeah. They can be difficult conversations or less difficult conversations, due in part to what that relationship has been like all along. And I think it's very important that, older adults shouldn't be asking their children permission, right? They should feel empowered
Sure.
to make those decisions that are best for them. But they really need to engage in conversation openly and honestly to hear the impact of that younger generation and share their rationale for why they want to form a relationship, because sometimes there are these obstacles. If someone is an older widow or widower, their child might not want them to remarry because the child themselves is so emotionally tied to the deceased parent. They're
Mhm.
not ready to kind of let their living parent go and find new happiness. And that's something that the adult child really needs to think about, whose happiness matters. And they really need to privilege the happiness of the parent seeking that relationship. But then on the flip side, sometimes children actually can see things very clearly. And one phenomenon that has been exploding due to the internet is abuse and exploitation of older adults in romantic partnerships, right? We've seen catfishing, and we've seen people have their savings kind of ripped out from under them from duplicitous faux suitors that they meet online. And someone who had a very long marriage, who was very trusting, might not have the radar up. And so the children actually can be helpful when someone forms a new relationship to make sure that they're not being part of some kind of scheme that is exploitative and harmful. But then once you get past those big hurdles, they really need to talk honestly and openly about, if the older adult does enter a new relationship, what does that mean in terms of residence? What does it mean in terms of the will that was previously drafted? Who gets the house? Who is the power of attorney for healthcare, the legal power of attorney as well? Where do you even celebrate major holidays? Traditions can change. You might be having the same Thanksgiving for 40 consecutive years, but then the, remarried or repartnered parent might have a whole new family to celebrate with. So even if folks don't necessarily agree, they do at least need to share that information so both generations can make informed choices.
Yeah, doctor, this next question, this is not out of left field, but it's probably one I should have asked at the beginning of the conversation. Is this an American phenomenon? And I know your research was really based around the United States, but are we seeing this in other cultures? The Great Divorce, and you can just speak anecdotally if we don't have direct evidence. But is this anomalous to the United States, or is this going on around the globe?
It's not anomalous to the United States, and I actually have a couple papers based on European data. You're seeing generally similar patterns in Europe, specifically kind of Western, Northern Europe, a little bit less so Southern Europe, that rates of gray divorce are not as high in those places relative to the US, but they are actually increasing pretty steeply. But what we see more of in Europe, in the US at all ages, is cohabitation more so than marriage. And there are a variety of reasons for that. Some have to do with kind of legal or economic benefits. Some have to do with just kind of a greater openness, right? And kind of less of a strict moral code that people abide by. So many of those patterns are very similar. And some of the challenges are just as difficult, right? Some of maybe the legal and property ones less so, because in other countries, older adults tend to cohabit more in the US. But these emotional issues about holidays and about ties, right? If someone repartners and they have new stepchildren, how do they get along with the biological children? All of these are just normal part of family life when you do any kind of reconfiguring of families.
Yeah. It. My last question for you, doctor, is in terms of the data that you've collected, the work, the research, does this inform, the fact that more people are cohabitating, there are great divorces, they're going through all these circumstances. Are there lessons here for policymakers at the state and local level? I'm thinking about, you mentioned laws about, for example, common law marriage, things like that. Are there lessons that will inform lawmakers for the future policies, knowing that we're an aging society, that this will continue to occur?
Absolutely. And I think, there were so many different laws across regions and across municipalities. I think one very simple one is hospital visitation, who is defined as family, right? And I think we need to move away from law and blood, right? Legal ties and blood ties is the main definitions for family, and think about who that older adult thinks of as their family, not just hospital visitations, but end of life decision making.
Hmm.
If an older adult doesn't legally appoint a person to be their decision maker, in some states they have these rules of default, right? It goes first to your spouse and then your child and then another relative. But what about that long term romantic partner? So, those are just a couple of examples whereby definitions of family need to change legally to mesh with these ever expanding notions of what older adults consider to be their family members.
Yep. So important knowing that societies around the globe are aging. We're getting older. Dr. Carr, we're going to have to leave it here. So great to see you. Thank you for your research, your expert analysis, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very
Oh, I'd
soon.
be happy to. Thank you.
And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse, for all the news in one place. Details, of course, at our website. And we're back again tomorrow for another great edition of BRN. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.